Hello, Shayla from Stuart Moores Textiles here. I want to share with you how I add sashiko stitching to my visible mending projects. I fixed a hole in this denim shirt. Let me show you how I did it. To begin, I'm going to cut a small patch and place it on the back side of my garment. To keep my patch in place, I will pin it before I fold under the top edge and then pin that in place, fold it under. To begin sewing, I use a simple whip stitch across the top edge of my patch and sew to 2 or 3 stitches before the end of this side of my patch. This technique is the same one I showed in the simple pants mending tutorial, so if you need a longer, more in-depth tutorial about this part of the process, you can find that at the beginning of that video. I am using thread that is a similar color to the shirt I am mending, because it will be visible from the front of my garment. But this is a visible mending project, so do feel free to use any color you'd like. When you get close to the end of the first side of your patch, tuck under the second side and pin that in place, just like you did for the first side. To begin stitching, use the side of your needle to hide the folded under fabric before finishing the stitches on your first side, and then turn to whip stitch along the second folded edge of your patch. Continue in this way for the third and fourth sides of your patch until it looks something like this. You can see the stitching and the silhouette of the patch from the front side of your shirt. Next, on the visible side of my garment, I'm going to use a clear ruler to mark perpendicular lines roughly every ½ inch across my patch. When you get to the hole or tear, however big or small, draw your line on the top and bottom of each side of your hole. I like to use a clear ruler when I do this because you can see the mark you have just made, which makes lining up your next line really easy and straight, but you can use any straight edge. I'm going to flip my ruler horizontally and mark lines every ½ inch until my stitching grid looks something like the graphic above. I'm using a friction pen for this step because it comes off easily with heat, but you can use any washable fabric pen or tailor's chalk to make this stitching grid. I'm using SMT plant-dyed embroidery floss for the sashiko stitching portion of this mend in the color peony. To begin stitching, I'm going to start at the corner of my grid, making the first row of stitches the center 1/3 of each stitching block, as you can see on the graphic above. I will do the same thing, stitching the center 1/3 of each stitching block for the next horizontal line, turning my work as I need to sew comfortably. When you reach the hole, continue stitching in the same pattern over the hole as best you can. Continue stitching as established in the previous 2 rows for the third and final horizontal line. It will look like this when you're finished, and this on the back. You will notice that I like to hide my knots, slipping them behind my patch when I start sewing. This is just an option. You don't have to do this, but I like to. I'm going to stitch the vertical lines in my stitching grid the same way I did the horizontal lines, stitching the center 1/3 of each stitching block. This is what it will look like when you get to the end of this step. And here's the back. Next, I'm going to add diagonal stitches where the horizontal and vertical grid lines meet, stitching from the lower right quadrant to the upper left. My apologies, the graphic above shows the stitches going in the opposite direction that I'm sewing in the video, but it was really hard for me to keep track of which way it was up when I was building these graphics, but it doesn't really matter which direction they are going, so long as you have a set of stitches diagonally crossing the place where the grid lines meet. Continue in the same way for the second and third rows. These diagonal stitches will most likely be going in different directions for each horizontal line, but that's okay, because in the end we are going to cross them with the next set of stitches, and it's just going to look like an X when we are through. When you are stitching over the hole or torn area of your garment, It's important to try and keep the pattern going as best you can. In some cases, you will need to eyeball it, but this isn't an exact science, and eyeballing it will definitely do. For the final step, we're going to do the same diagonal line stitch we did in the last step, but this time heading in the opposite direction, directly over our last stitches, to create an X in every place on our stitching grid where the horizontal and vertical lines meet. And this is what it looks like when we are just about finished. The last thing I want to show you is how I tie off my knots to make them invisible. When I'm finished stitching, I'm going to take my needle and poke it through to the back between my patch and my garment and pull it through that space. I'm going to make a knot at the end of my embroidery floss, making it as close to my patch as possible. The reason for this is that I want to make a secure knot, but I need to see it to make it, so I tie it as close to where I finish sewing as possible. And then I snip off the excess floss, and if you'd like, you can tuck the knot underneath the patch to hide it. Make sure you snip any other hanging threads off before finishing. And finally, I will give my Mend a blast of hot air from my hair blow dryer to get rid of the grid lines. And there you have it. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and give it a try. Until next time.